The iPhone 4S was released all the way back in 2011, 13 years ago at the time of writing this. It looked the same as last year's iPhone 4 and wasn't meant to be as big of a jump forward as the last year's anyway. The improvements for this year's iPhone was almost completely on the inside, being the first iPhone to have a dual-core chip. The camera was upgraded from 5 megapixels to 8, and Siri was introduced. These were the biggest changes surrounding this model. It was well liked and praised for its faster speeds, better camera, and of course Siri, as well as a few other things I'll talk about later. But all of this was 12 years ago now, so how does it hold up today? Well, of course, it's 12 years old, running on 2015 software, should it be updated to iOS 9. So it's not amazing by any means, but it does run. Running that phone is the Apple A5 chip. It features a dual-core processor, making the iPhone 4S the first iPhone with a dual-core chip. Some say it was the first out of all smartphones, but that title goes to the LG Optimus 2X, released 10 months earlier. Anyways, the A5 chip made for quite a big jump in performance over the A4, allowing for an extra 2 years of software support for all devices that the A5 chip was in, but maybe that shouldn't have been the case. The iPhone 4S was supported from iOS 5 till iOS 9, so from 2011 till 2016, which is very impressive, especially for the time. For reference, Samsung's 2011 flagship, the Galaxy S2, was released with Android 2.3.4, and its last update was Android 4.1.2. With Android 5 being released in late 2014, it got about 3 and a bit years of major software support. But the iPhone 4S probably should have been left on iOS 8, as talked about in previous videos. The downside of reaching iOS 9 was that it slows down the device significantly, making it so that people who were used to these devices became frustrated with how slow, and at times unresponsive, their device had become. These devices being the iPod Touch 5, iPad 2 and 3, and of course the iPhone 4S. All have the A5, or in the iPad 3's case, a variation of it. Should these devices have been left on iOS 8, it would have still given them decent software support for the time, and it would have been kept a much more enjoyable experience and still been completely usable for what you would need for a good couple of years. What I have here on this iPhone 4S is actually iOS 8, and the iPod Touch 5 here is running the latest version of iOS 9. The hardware inside is the same A5 chip, so the performance is very similar. So let's do a quick comparison of the speed. Here it's shown clear that iOS 9 is significantly slower for A5 devices than iOS 8 was. While in some use cases this may not be a bother or not too noticeable, back in the day, if this was somebody's main device who was used to using it on previous versions, the update would show its effects easily, especially if it had been used since launch, as the battery would have deteriorated and the storage should be closer to full, meaning a frustrating experience was likely for anyone on this older hardware. And what about that hardware? What else has it got? As said before, the iPhone 4S looks very similar to the iPhone 4, but this is its own review, so I'll go over the design here. Plus, I haven't made an iPhone 4 review yet. I hopefully will, eventually. So that design. The iPhone 4 4S design was the first to feature a glass back, and the last till the iPhone 8 and 10 in 2017. It looks really nice, but was very fragile, and without wireless charging it didn't have a practical purpose. The frame running all around the phone is made of stainless steel, again, something not seen again until the iPhone 10. Steve Jobs apparently was quite a fan of stainless steel because of how it looked when it aged. And I say, it appears to have aged quite well. The frame also contained the antenna bands, which is one of the only visible differences between the iPhone 4 and 4S. The antenna band on the top of the 4, next to the headphone jack, was moved to the left side of the 4S, above the volume buttons and switch. This was because of the antenna gate issue with the iPhone 4, where holding the phone a certain way would mean call receptions could drop and phone calls may even cut out. This was partially fixed with a software update, but still could be an issue if the phone was used without a case, so this was fixed properly with the 4S. The camera looks the same on the back, but has been upgraded from 5 megapixels to 8. A very decent improvement, and definitely good enough for the time. Photos can still look okay should it have plenty of light, mostly outside photos of still subjects like an ocean view or photos of plants, something like that. On the bottom of the device, you have the classic 30-pin connector, the last iPhone with it as a matter of fact, being replaced with the Lightning connector on the iPhone 5, which at the time was a big improvement, but stuck around for a bit too long, with Apple only swapping it out for USB-C a few months ago, meaning Lightning was the main connector on iPhones for nearly 11 years. On the front of the device, you have the same 0.3 megapixel selfie camera, same as last year's. The classic home button on the bottom, as well as that, at the time, still top of the line Retina screen, which holds up to this day. Pixels aren't nearly as visible on the 4 and 4S compared to the first 3 iPhone models. But how was it when it was brand new, back in 2011? This device was received fairly well, apart from the slight disappointment of the iPhone 5 not being released. It was a big jump in performance, still usual for the time, and released on iOS 5, which in itself was brand new and had its own features, being the operating system that introduced iCloud, which is still a big thing today, as well as the introduction of iMessage, a revamped notification center, and wireless software updates becoming available, and more. It made for a solid update. Paired with the 4S, it was a very compelling deal. It sold for $199 with contract in the US and $649 unlocked and off contract. Here in Australia, it sold for $799. Many people seem to agree that it was a good deal, selling 4 million units in the first 3 days, according to Apple, which is pretty impressive, especially when compared to the iPhone 4, which sold 1.7 million units in its first 3 days. The one big thing everybody was talking about was the addition of Siri, with some even calling it the main selling point of the device for casual users. And for 2011 it was pretty advanced, making calls, setting alarms, and checking reminders, those sorts of things. But Siri today isn't known for being very advanced, with other virtual assistants like Google and Samsung's being much better. Apple claims that this is due to their security policy not holding on to their users' personal information, meaning the assistant can't use it to make better recommendations. Still, it was impressive 12 years ago, and it did appear to help the 4S's sales. Now, back in the present, what can the iPhone 4S still do? If you have one lying about, which many people do, what is it good for? Well, jailbreaking is always an option, and is recommended for older devices like this, as it can be sped up, improve app compatibility, as well as more customizability, just to name a few things. It can really help improve the experience of the 4S, and make it possible to downgrade the software to iOS 8 again, meaning it can really be sped up. And if you're willing to go a step further, you can downgrade it back to iOS 6, if you're looking to see this phone in its prime. There are some other uses, like if you have a big iTunes library, or an Apple Music subscription, this iPhone can play that music without much issue, meaning this iPhone can be used as a little music player, maybe to be left in the car or connected to a speaker, something like that. In fact, I have an Apple Music playlist downloaded to the iPod Touch 5 from earlier. At the end of the day, the iPhone 4S was a great phone, but its technology was pushed too far with iOS 9. It has the iconic design of the iPhone 4 while not carrying as many issues. It brought many features to the table we still use today and will continue to use for a long time to come, such as iCloud, while still having its uses in today's world. It's becoming obsolete and doesn't run many apps on their latest versions. It's overshadowed by what came before and after it, that has its own little spot in the iPhone's history. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I think we're about done here. See you in the next one.